What's going on in Cameroon, and will the Indomitable Lions forfeit their match against Cape Verde? What can we expect from Finidi George and the new-look Nigerian Super Eagles? Will Mahrez ever play for the Algerian national team again? And is Morocco the best squad in Africa? We're going to talk about all of that and more on this new episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. Thanks for tuning in. As always, my name is Mahrez and I'm your host. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by the very good people over at africasacountry.com. So it's been a while since we've checked in. It was since the Champions League final between Al Ahly and Esperance de Tunis. But I think we all needed a little bit of a break, and we're back to regularly scheduled programming now. And just in time, because tomorrow we kick off the June FIFA World Cup qualifiers in the African zone. There are several very good matches that are going to be taking place over the next few days, and I thought it would be a good occasion to sit here and chat about a few of them. Before we get into the matches that I wanted to break down in depth, just wanted to mention that there are matches like Libya versus Mauritius that I'm not going to analyze, but pay attention to what's happening with the Libyan national team under Coach Micho. He's still undefeated with them, and I think over, if I'm not mistaken, 11 or 13 matches. We did an interview with him and found out about how he's managed to accomplish so much in such a short period of time on this channel. So you can go back and listen to that if you'd like. Mali and Ghana, Eto'o left out Dede Ayew, and he's sort of brought in a bunch of new young players. Is this going to be a new look Black Stars? And Tunisia versus Equatorial Guinea is dominating headlines because we found out that after 10 years of playing football, Emilio Nsue, the legendary player for Nzalang Nacional, has been deemed ineligible. He's been banned from football, and Equatorial Guinea have been forced to forfeit their first two matches against Namibia and I believe Liberia. And so they're now sitting at 0 points. Those are a few of the headlines I wanted to touch upon. And now let's break down real matches that we're going to be really paying attention to. And we're going to start off with Cameroon and Cape Verde because, a few weeks ago we spoke to Giovanni Bambewane about what's going on in Cameroon. There's an all-out war between the Cameroonian Football Federation and the Ministry of Sport. Now, a few things to say just from the offset. The standard in international football is that football federations are in charge of everything. Ministries of sport should not involve themselves in the affairs of the football federation. Let's not be naive though. On the African continent, almost every single country has oversight from the Ministry of Sport because that's indirectly the government, or it is directly the government. I remember speaking to somebody that was very high up in previous CAF administrations, and he told me that CAF is fully aware that they cannot host any competitions. They cannot continue their standard operating procedure without the benevolence of heads of state. And that's why you see, CAF presidents and FIFA presidents always shaking hands with them. And because these presidents are spending so much money, there's no profit really to host these events and to put on these events and to give subsidies and a lot of money, sometimes millions of dollars, to these football federations. And so the Cameroonian case is a little specific because there's an unnatural relationship there, but this happens all over the continent, maybe not as explicitly. However, in Cameroon, there was a convention that was signed in 2015 between the Ministry of Sport and the Football Federation, where the Ministry of Sport basically agreed to pay the salary of the coaches and the staff, but they also have an input about who can be hired. And so when Samuel Eto'o, and we've gone through a list of his scandals in the interview with Giovanni Wane Bamba. It's only been 2.5 years, but he's already been embroiled in more than 5 or 6 very serious scandals, the most serious of which involves alleged match fixing and leaked audio recordings. But you can go listen to that in the previous episode. But I think when the Ministry of Sport saw that Samuel Eto'o was not really succeeding in governing the federation well, they wanted to step in and unilaterally impose a coach and his staff on the Football Federation. However, what made Samuel Eto'o such a great player is his personality too, and his mental strength and courage. This is a kid that at 17 years old, left Cameroon, goes to Spain by himself. There's nobody waiting for him at the airport. He's supposed to be, I think it was signing at Real Madrid at the time. Nobody's waiting for him at the airport. And a very similar story to Salif Keita, if you're familiar with it. He grew up in New Bell in Douala, rough neighborhood. What made him great is that mental strength. And so he's not going to take that lying down where the Ministry of Sport comes in and imposes themselves upon him. The problem now is that they have a match against Cape Verde in a few days. And you initially you thought they had solved things because Eto'o went to the president's office, and after initially dismissing Marc Brice, the Belgian coach that the Ministry of Sport hired, he allowed the Marc Brice hire to happen. However, Eto'o wanted to place a few of his people on the staff, and Marc Brice wanted his own staff. You thought they could come to some kind of compromise, but apparently they haven't. And as a result now, this battle is still happening just hours before this match is going to take place. We're only 24, 48, 72 hours before this match is going to take place. And as a result, for example, the Cameroonian Football Federation withdrew ticket sales. They didn't give the staff and the players training shirts or tracksuits or anything of the like. The Football Federation was not allowed to enter the hotel where the team were staying. I believe it's the Hilton Hotel, if I'm not mistaken. And so you still have this war that's happening. And players like Mumin Gamale, the right winger who played so well at the previous the two AFCONs ago, not this one, he posted on social media like, please guys, we need to get it under control. We need to have peace between the federation and the Ministry of Sport. But to be honest, I don't see this really being solved unless the president, Paul Biya, steps in. He's really the only one. And when I say the president, I mean his staff and the people that work in the president's office. They're the ones that are going to have to step in and impose a unilateral, mutually acceptable solution upon the two entities. Because otherwise, L'Equipe, the French sport broadsheet newspaper, the biggest sport newspaper in France or in the French-speaking world, has said that the Cameroonian Football Federation are even contemplating forfeiting this match. Like, this is a World Cup qualifying match we're thinking of. There have been other reports that the Cameroonian Football Federation is ready to go to the Court of Arbitration of Sport against their own government to say, like, no, they don't have the right to impose themselves like this on the Football Federation. There's these, worries that the FIFA is going to step in and impose a normalization committee on the Cameroonian Football Federation and ultimately reset everything at zero. And this is not a team that was, in great form and that was playing very well at the previous AFCON, quite on the contrary. And so, and on top of all of that, they have very tough matches against Cape Verde and Angola, two teams that made it to the quarterfinals of the previous African Cup of Nations, which Cameroon didn't. So it's not looking good. Look, we're going to check in again in a week's time after the matches are played. But I would be very, very surprised if Cameroon managed to come away with positive results against Cape Verde and Angola with all of this going on in the background. I don't think they're going to forfeit the match. I think they're going to have to find some kind of mutually acceptable solution, and they will. The government is going to step in. But I don't see how this kind of atmosphere is conducive to bringing in results. Anyways, Cameroon was always going to be the main subject of conversation, but let's move on. Let's talk about Algeria versus Guinea next, just because it's the country that I know the best. Obviously, it's the country that I live in and the country that I cover the most. Look, Algeria brought in a new coach in March. And for most of these national teams, March wasn't a real international window. If you had any really good player that was playing at a competitive club, they were mostly focused on their club. They were not focused on the national team. Many star players didn't really show up in the March window. But it was just like a good test. If you remember, Nigeria didn't even have a coach until a few days before their friendly match. Mo Salah didn't go to play for the Egyptian national team. And Riyad Mahrez didn't come to the Algerian national team. Now, didn't think much of it then because he had a catastrophic AFCON. I think it would have been healthy for him to take some distance and some space from the Algerian national team and vice versa. Because if he came in March, I think he might have started to be insulted by some of the supporters, and then that could have devolved into something that was much worse. So I think him taking space, taking distance in March was a good idea. But then the main question was, is he going to be selected in June? Apparently, Vladimir Petkovic in March wanted Mahrez to appear, and Mahrez told him he needs a little bit of time. Petkovic, the Swiss-Bosnian coach, the new coach of the Algerian national team, apparently told Mahrez, according to Petkovic, listen, take as much time as you want. When you're ready, let me know. Call me and let me know. At the press conference, Petkovic said Riyad Mahrez didn't call him. And so he assumed that he still wasn't ready to show up for the national team. And so he didn't select him. Riyad Mahrez tweets later that day, I haven't received a phone call from the federation or the coach. I would have really loved to play these matches. So I'm going to make a note of this. I'm going to make a note of this, whatever that means, as if he's like going to sanction the federation or the coach or whatever the case may be. And so a very troubling dynamic there between the federation and Algeria's best player of the last 30 years. Some might argue best player ever. So it's not just Riyad Mahrez that was excluded from the squad. Players like Islam Slimani, the veteran striker, the leading scorer of all time of the Algerian national team, he also wasn't called up. Sofiane Ferrouli was also not called up. And for those of us that like to read between the lines, we see that these are all players that were very, very close to the previous coach, Jamal Belmadi. And I think what Petkovic was doing here, he's not saying it explicitly, but I think what he's really doing is he's saying, look, the previous coach was so influential, the previous players were so influential that maybe he would have faced some kind of resistance if he brought them back because of the way that the previous coach was unceremoniously he resigned, but he was sort of let go. I think what Petkovic is trying to do is saying, look, I'm going to rebuild completely. So he's confident that he can win this group. And I think he's just going to try to give it a go with the young players. And so lots of players like Rayan Aitnouri, for example, the Wolves left back, the fullback, player that came into the squad about a year ago as a promising player. The way he's evolved, and I think not many people around the continent are noticing, it's been absolutely incredible. In my opinion, one of the best fullbacks in the Premier League. And he's going to be, in my opinion, this summer transferred to a Champions League club. Very, very good. And I think that's what Petkovic is betting on, is players like him, players like Fershaibi, who bizarrely wasn't called up, players like Badreddine Bouanani, Houssam Aouar, all new Algerian players that have been called up in the last year or so to step up and develop into world-class talent. And that way we'll sort of forget about the previous generation. So it's an interesting, operating or modus operandi, we should say. I don't know if it's the right decision or not to sort of harshly divorce with the previous generation and embrace a new generation of players. But I think it's his decision. And as supporters or as journalists, we can't really judge that. We can only judge it upon results. And so Algeria is in an interesting position, but I think it's way too early to judge if he's making the right decision or the wrong decision. That's going to come with results a posteriori. Another interesting match that I have my eye on is just, now I'm going to start speeding it up a little bit, Ivory Coast versus Gabon. And it's just going to be an interesting match because of the dynamic. Ivory Coast are playing, I think, for the first time with 3 stars on their shirt, and that's always a special moment. They're playing in Korhogo in the very north of the country, and I think they're still going on like this celebratory tour. Like, it's not like they're going to be presenting the trophy to the crowd and everything, but it's like we're going to take the team and parade them around the entire country. They didn't play in Korhogo during the AFCON, but now they finally get a chance to do that. Emers Faye is officially the new coach. I think Maxalin Gradel is going to receive some kind of ovation in the 15th minute because he took his international retirement in May. All of these things are, in my opinion, not really a great idea because some of the focus is away from the match in the 90 minutes and it's more about still celebrating the historic result that the Elephants got in the previous AFCON. That said, I have no trust in the Gabonese national team. And so I think, as a journalist, over the last 7 to 8 years, I think I've been unnecessarily harsh on Gabon and some of the star players like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I've written very, very critical articles and had very critical opinions of him. But I just don't see how the squad of players who are practically the same group of players that you've had for the last, some of them for 10 years. Players like Bruno Akwele-Manga is still the captain. Aubameyang is still showing up. Denny Boenga has been there since 2017, but he's actually performing, at a decent level. But players that it feels like the least amount of turnover in the entire African continent when it comes to national teams comes from Gabon. And so it's one of those things where it's that Albert Einstein quote, right? It's the trying the same thing over and over again. I don't think it's ever going to work really with this group of players. Just too much complacency, in my opinion. Just a quick note on Emers Faye. I liked his communication because he didn't call up a few players that have been performing well. Players like Eric Bailly, since his return to Spain, has been very impressive. Karim Konate, I think, has 20 goals. He might even be the leading scorer in the Austrian Bundesliga for Red Bull Salzburg. He wasn't called up. But what I liked about the press conference of Emers Faye is that he said, look, he praised those players. Look, we're paying attention. There's just a lot of competition. We want to test out some new players, but if they continue doing what they're doing, for sure they're going to be called up, and so on and so forth. He also went and traveled and met with Wilfred Zaha, and he explained, like once you're performing well with your club, would love to have this new project and would love to have you on board. So I like what Emers Faye is doing from a player management perspective. I like what he's doing from a communication perspective. Now it's just going to be, can they continue the results on the pitch and not be distracted by this these ceremonies that they're doing as they're still celebrating the AFCON triumph. Let's talk about 3 more matches quickly. Morocco versus Zambia. Morocco, in my opinion, the best squad in Africa. When you look at players 1 to 23, incredible. And some of them are coming in with really high form. Players like Sofiane Rahimi, I love that player and his family, and the way he steps up and scores in finals every single time. He's done a great job in the Asian Champions League this year. Ayoub El-Kaabi, 11 goals, I believe, in the Conference League. It's not Europa League that Olympiacos run, right? It's the Conference League. I think that's the most ever in a European competition. Sofiane Amrabat came alive in the FA Cup final for Manchester United. They have a great mix of youth and experience. Young players like Amir Richardson that are coming in, Targhalin, Shadi Riyad, but also they brought back in Romain Saiss, the very experienced centre half. It's really a great squad, and I don't think that there's anybody on the continent that has a better squad or a more balanced squad. That said, Walid Regragui, I think that the main criticism is that he's been too stubborn with his formation, too stubborn with his tactics, and the team is not producing enough from an attacking perspective. They're not dynamic enough. They don't score enough goals. And I think this is going to be one where the entire country of Morocco is going to be watching this match against Zambia and seeing, is he going to show us something different? Is he going to still play that 4-1-4-1 that he's been playing since the World Cup? Or are we going to move into a different kind of formation, different patterns of play, different sequences of play? Regragui apparently had a shake-up, from when his staff brought in a lot of new assistant coaches. Are we going to see a difference on the pitch? That's one thing that we're going to have to see. But again, squad 1 to 23, Morocco is the best in the continent, in my opinion, at the moment. Egypt versus Burkina Faso. The Hassan twins get their list right, in my opinion. It was interesting to see because if you remember when Mo Salah got injured during the AFCON, he left. Remember, he wanted to go do his physiotherapy with Liverpool. And he was very highly criticized in Egypt because of that. People saying, Hussam Hassan, the coach now, saying he shouldn't come back to Egypt, basically to the Egyptian national team, because he's saying he could have done his physiotherapy over there in Cote d'Ivoire. The Egyptian national team staff has everything they need there. He still could have had a positive impact, just his presence being along with his teammates, showing leadership and so on. And so the current coach, was criticizing him nonstop. And I thought that maybe there could be some, a grudge there from Salah, but no. He accepted the call-up. It's a new start for him. He didn't come in March, but he accepted the call-up here. The way, his season ended with Liverpool, you saw like him fighting with Klopp and so on and so forth. And now he went to Egypt and he shaved his head. It's usually a symbolic sign to say like, all right, this is a new beginning. And I wonder if he's finally going to make that move to the Saudi Premier League, because he really is the biggest star in the Arab world when it comes to football. And I think that would be the crown jewel signing for the Saudi League, is to get a player like Mohamed Salah there. It would bring in tens of millions of more viewers from a country like Egypt. And he is the biggest commercial, marketable superstar in Egyptian national team history because of his exploits in European football. So it's going to be curious to see, with Hussam Hassan, I think the players really respect him as a legend. The fans support him as a legend of the national team and of the sport. But what we're going to have to watch, and what I'm going to be watching clearly, is tactically, technically, what does his coaching look like? Because it's one thing to have decent man management or to be respected by your players and fans. And coaching competence is a completely different thing. And I don't know if Hussam Hassan and his staff, including his brother Ibrahim Hassan, have the necessary coaching competence to take on one of the two most successful national teams in African football history. Finally, last match I'm going to touch upon, because I think we've been going on for a good 20 minutes already, is Nigeria versus South Africa. Look, this is a tricky match. It's a difficult start for Finidi George because he was appointed very, very late in the March window, and it was difficult to judge him there. Now he's had a few months to sort of, put his ideas into place. But he's coming up against a very well-oiled South African side with a coach in Hugo Broos that's been there for years, that finished third at the previous African Cup of Nations. And Nigeria, there's been instability. They had Jose Peseiro, they got rid of him, and now they brought in Finidi George. To make matters worse, to exacerbate matters, there's a labor strike in Nigeria, and I think up to 8 players have still not arrived to the team camp. And so that's not conducive to preparing your team sufficiently prior to the match in Uyo against South Africa. Uyo, by the way, a city in which South Africa has never lost in the 2 matches that they've played there. They won one and they drew a match. They drew a match there as well. But Nigeria, they do have players that are performing at the very highest level. When you look at Ademola Lookman and what he did in the Europa League, so Atalanta won the Europa League, and so Olympiacos was the Conference League. I believe it was a hat-trick in the second leg of the final, or was it second leg? Yeah. Victor Boniface, Nathan Tella with Leverkusen, Osimhen, of course, with Napoli. You have players performing at the very highest level for the Nigerian Super Eagles, and so same thing with Hussam Hassan. Finidi George is a player that's been there, done that, and he has the respect of the players because they know he knows what it takes. And same thing with the supporters. And he did a pretty decent job with Enyimba prior to taking the Nigerian national team on. But this is going to be a very, very, very tough test. I think you would probably sign for a draw if you're Nigeria or South Africa. You just don't want to lose this match because it's going to be a big momentum swing if you do end up losing this one, especially for Nigeria at home. For South Africa, I think they just had, there's not much to say. It's like we know the squad, we know how they're going to play. A few injuries. I think Grant Kakana has been ruled out with injury, but there's not much to say really. We just expect them to play the way they've been playing, play good football, and if they can manage to get a victory in Nigeria, that would be absolutely massive. We're going to leave it there for now. We're going to check in after these first round of matches, do a quick review, preview the next round of matches, which are going to take place more towards the 11th, 12th of June, and then review those as well. I'm going to be in Germany, and then I'm going to be in France, so I'm going to be in new locations podcasting, but we're going to keep this up and provide thorough coverage of the international break. Please excuse my daughter screaming in the background. I'm going to go take care of her right now, and thanks for listening, thanks for tuning in, and we'll speak in the next episode of the African Five-Side Podcast.